fact. But I had an easy time with English and literature, and that helped too. I could read things and understand them, and I could write things that other people would think that was good and understandable. So all of that kind of meshed together. And I had a typical childhood. I had to work on the farm some, and which I didn't like. I told people I made myself a cotton row promise one time. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, when you plant cotton in the South, you plant it in long rows, and several times of the year you'll have to go in there and work on those, and work on that cotton, chopping and hoeing and picking and all that, which is real hard, hot, physical labor. So I made myself a cotton row promise when I was about 10 years old that I wouldn't be a farmer. I didn't want to be a farmer. And I had interest in other things. I won't say better things, because there are a lot of people that are good farmers, make a lot of money at farming and enjoy farming and have farmed for generations. But I wanted to go on and do something else. And I didn't know at the time, didn't really know what, had no concept that, yeah, I could go beyond high school and go to college and learn whatever. Nobody told me that. It was kind of assumed back in those days, at least around in this part of the country and around our family and friends, that you sort of did what your parents did, what your dad did. If your dad was a carpenter, you might turn out to be a carpenter or a bricklayer or something like that. And if your dad was a truck driver, you might want to go into trucking or run a service station or something like that, which were and still are all honorable jobs, and some of them pay quite good nowadays. But I didn't take that interest. You looked around and you saw there were some lawyers, very few, some doctors, some dentists, people like that, some business owners, and you always assumed their children would go off and be some of that, lawyers or doctors or dentists, and that was for them, but it wasn't for you. And that's just kind of the way it was. And that went on during my elementary school and up in my middle school. And like I say, I made some pretty good grades and nothing outstanding. But I kept that interest. I'd build little projects. I used to build little radios. We'd build crystal radios and one-tube radios, and build all kind of little things around that we could. It didn't have much money. Things we could get our hands on, and we could build, and a bunch of things we had interest in. And in those days, there was something came along too that caught my interest, and it also has changed my life through the years and kind of led to my American dream. Is supposed to be the subject I'm speaking of. But the American space program started out really after World War II with Dr. von Braun, Werner von Braun, and his German rocket team came to the United States. And first they went off to Texas, and then later on they formed NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and they headquartered that thing in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, you know, I'm in northeastern Alabama, in a little town called Scottsboro. I grew up around this area, not just in this town, but around this county. But right down the road, 45 miles away, NASA, the people who were going to launch rockets around the Earth, go into orbit, the people who wanted to go to the moon, it set up right down the road, 45, 50 miles away. And that caught my interest also. But I collected magazines. I saw information about the early astronauts. And I kind of had that idea in the back of my head. Maybe I wanted to be an astronaut, but something told me that I couldn't. And it was right. It was right, I couldn't be. But anyway, that was down there. That too added to I read and learned some about the space program, which made me learn more about science. And I had interest in radio, like I said before. So I studied around and got my amateur radio license when I was young, about 15. I think I was about 15 when I first got my license. So I had to learn some electronics on that. And all these things that you, growing up, that you are exposed to or get interest in, kind of builds up your data bank, is the way I see it. The more you study, learn hobbies and jobs and interests and people you know and talk to and things you see and places you go, all that kind of builds up in your head, and it makes you the person that you're finally turn out to be if you ever turn out to be that person. I guess I feel like I'm still learning and growing and changing. I suppose you do that till you're no longer here, till you die. So anyway, all that was kind of adding up. And I had a ball with ham radio, amateur radio. I got to be on amateur radio, and what that let me do is personally get out and talk to people all around the country and even in some foreign countries, and it broadened my horizon even more. And having the amateur radio, I had a pretty good shortwave receiver, which again let me listen to all those exotic foreign places, and I spent many nights, went to sleep and left the radio on all night long, listening to ships at sea, listening to foreign broadcasts, like I said, from London and Moscow and Paris and all those things. And all that adds up. I may sound a little choked up here. I've still got some congestion, so if my voice sounds a little croaky and froggy, that's the reason. I may have to click off the camera and cough every so often. But anyway, so that kind of all built up. And there I was in high school and had all these interests and things that I like to do. And I got down to being up in high school, and toward my senior year, I didn't, still hadn't made plans. Nobody had mentioned going to college. I didn't know what I was going to do after high school. I had made no plans. My parents were satisfied that I get a high school degree and go out and go to work. But I wanted something else. And this would have been now in the late 60s, middle 60s. I graduated in 1964. And if you are a student of U.S. and world history, you know that we were in another war in 1964. The Vietnam War was kindling, building, getting worse in 1964. But for some crazy reason, we had recruiters come to our high school. Navy recruiters, Marine recruiters, Army recruiters, Air Force recruiters. And now, here again, I don't know why, but for some reason I've always had an interest in the ocean and seagoing. Maybe it's all the old stories and books I read about the pirates and the Columbus and the seagoing adventures and all that. But the sea and boats had just always fascinated me. We had a Navy recruiter come to our high school, and sounded pretty good. And I had in my mind, if I had done what I thought I wanted to do, luckily and thankfully I did get redirected. But I had plans of signing up, joining the Navy out of high school with the war going on, and I wanted to go into the submarine corps. Again, don't ask me why, I don't know. I've always been a person that it didn't bother me to be a loner. I get along fine with other people, have a lot of good friends and all that, and get along fine with my family, but it's never bothered me to go out and be by myself, and I'm still that way. I can go out in the woods by myself and have a good time. I can go out and eat lunch by myself and have a good time. I'm here by myself right now. It doesn't bother me to be alone and away like it would be on the submarines. I think I could have handled it, but I don't know that that would have been the best thing to have done during wartime. I guess there was no guarantee I would be on a submarine. I might have ended up on a PT boat on one of the Mekong rivers in Vietnam, for all that knows. But anyway, I didn't follow that. I had some more advice.